The soft ping of a phone notification shattered the silence of the evening. Ryan Collins glanced at the screen without thinking. Just another habit in a long list of habits he hadn't realized he'd formed. But what he saw wasn't a random message or a social update. It was an alert from the tracking app he'd installed 2 months ago. Caitlin's phone location, Elmview Motel, 9:07 p.m. His heart paused. That wasn't where she said she'd be. She told him she was in Seattle. A 2-day work conference, important meetings, client dinners, PowerPoint decks and boardroom handshakes. But now her digital signature was parked at a seedy roadside motel just 20 minutes from home. Ryan didn't move for a moment. He sat at the edge of the couch, jaw clenched, eyes narrowing as the motel's red pin pulsed on the map. His fingers moved before his thoughts fully caught up, zooming in, checking if the signal moved, maybe hoping for a glitch, some mistake, a blip in the system. The pin didn't move. The longer he stared, the more still he became, as if his body instinctively knew not to waste adrenaline on what came next. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. His chest burned, his stomach clenched, that familiar feeling of betrayal. He'd known it once, in college, thought he'd never feel it again. But this? With Caitlin, she had always been careful, secretive even, but elegant in it. Smooth lies wrapped in soft laughter. The kind of woman who could convince you the world wasn't burning while tossing another match over her shoulder. Ryan had always been observant, too observant. That was part of the problem. He stood up slowly, his mind already outlining the night's moves with chilling clarity. No confrontation, no accusations, not yet. First, the truth. He grabbed his keys, tossed on his black jacket, and slid his phone into the side pocket like it was a weapon. Elmview Motel. It sounded cheap. Forgettable. The kind of place where the front desk asked no questions, and the walls heard too many secrets. He pulled into the lot 20 minutes later. Headlights off, engine idling. His heart beat steadily, but his hands were steady, trained. He parked under the dim glow of a broken lamppost and reached for his phone again. Her location hadn't changed. Ryan exhaled, a slow, quiet release of air as he scanned the row of rooms. Number 12. He spotted her car first, matte silver, clean, always spotless, just like her lies. He didn't need to go closer yet. Instead, he waited, watching, documenting. The first photograph was just the car. The second, the motel sign, time-stamped. He sat there for almost 2 hours. Just before midnight, the motel door creaked open, and there she was. Caitlin emerging in Derek's oversized leather jacket, the one she once claimed was too heavy for her tastes. She was laughing. Ryan lifted his phone and took the shot, then another and another. The shutter of his phone's camera clicked, quietly, in the dark. Ryan zoomed in on Caitlin's face as she leaned against Derek, her laugh soft but clear in the cool air. She looked happy, relaxed, at ease in a way she hadn't been around him in months. Not guarded, not calculating, just effortlessly immersed in someone else's orbit. Ryan's jaw flexed, but his hand holding the phone remained unnervingly still. He wasn't here for a confrontation. He was here to remember, to document, to win. He lowered the phone slightly and watched them walk across the lot, her hand casually brushing against Derek's as they reached her car. Not his, hers. She hadn't even tried to hide it. It told Ryan everything he needed to know. This wasn't new. This wasn't some drunken accident or moment of weakness. This was routine, practiced, comfortable. And that made her betrayal intentional. His mind didn't race, it strategized. He wasn't the man who lost control. He was the man who waited in silence, watched long enough to see the full picture, and struck when the timing was perfect. They disappeared back into room 12 a few minutes later, door closing behind them with a dull click. Ryan didn't move. Instead, he tapped a folder on his phone. Opaline. The name of the tracking sub-app hidden beneath the shell of a boring calculator widget. He updated the GPS logs, took screenshots of the night's data trail, organized the photos he'd just taken into a private album titled, When She Lied. Each detail mattered, not because he needed proof for himself, he already knew, but because when he exposed her, it would be indisputable, irrefutable. The only thing worse than betrayal was letting the betrayer explain her way out of it. No, Caitlin wouldn't get the chance. A sudden movement caught his eye. Derek's silhouette at the window, shirtless, brushing his hair back while speaking to someone inside. Ryan raised the camera again. Snap. Snap. He didn't zoom in this time. He wanted the wide shot, the full scene. Caitlin's car, the door, the room. Derek. Context was everything. He sat through the night in near silence, shifting only to keep from cramping. Occasionally he sipped water, checked battery levels, cleared out storage space. There was no room for error. Every moment had to be preserved with surgical precision. The motel quieted, lights dimmed, and still he remained. It wasn't just about catching her. It was about outlasting her. At dawn, when the sky softened into a pale gray and birds began their aimless chorus, Ryan stepped out of his car, stretching slowly, not for comfort, but to reset his body for the final leg of the mission. He approached room 12 from a distance, taking one last photo of the closed curtain and parked car. Then he slid an envelope under the windshield wiper of Caitlin's sedan. Inside it, a single Polaroid, the moment she stepped into the room wearing another man's jacket. He left nothing else. No words, no message, just proof. Ryan didn't need her to guess what he knew. He needed her to feel seen. He drove away in silence, heading not home but to a nearby cafe. Somewhere with Wi-Fi, coffee, and quiet. Somewhere he could compose the email drafts he'd been outlining in his head all night. By the time Caitlin opened her inbox, she'd find a collection of photos, timestamps, and locations sent not just to her, but to her firm's HR department, her parents, and her closest friend. Ryan had the list ready. He had nothing else to say. He simply hit schedule send for 9:01 a.m. She'd be sipping her motel coffee when her world began to burn. At 9:01 a.m., exactly as planned, the digital chain reaction detonated. Ryan sat in his living room, a cup of lukewarm black coffee cradled in his hands, the light from his laptop flickering against his expressionless face. No music, no television, just the sterile hum of silence and the occasional ping as delivery confirmations rolled in. Subject line, ask her about room 12, recipients. Caitlin's manager, her two closest friends, her mother, her father, and one person she always underestimated, Melissa, the sharp-tongued coworker who envied Caitlin's polished mask of perfection. Each message was tailored, not just a mass copy-paste. Ryan had spent hours crafting the tone, just enough restraint to appear calm, just enough detail to prove the truth, just enough sting to let the recipients fill in the rest with their imagination. He didn't need to tell them what she did. He just had to show when, where, and with whom. By 9:07, Caitlin's phone was blowing up. Not that Ryan was watching, but he knew her too well. She would have started her day with a routine coffee from the lobby, maybe even kissed Derek goodbye with a smile, still buzzing with post-adrenaline smugness. And then, walking back to her car, she would see the envelope on the windshield. She'd rip it open, she'd see that photo, and she'd feel her blood run cold. The jacket, her face, that stupid guilty laugh. By 9:12, her life professionally, personally, and emotionally was already collapsing. Ryan's phone buzzed. He didn't look. He knew the pattern. First, Caitlin would call, then text, then switch to email. Her messages would move from confusion to fear to desperation, and finally, silence. He took another slow sip of coffee. It tasted like nothing. Caitlin sat in her car, staring at her phone like it had turned into a bomb. 12 missed calls from work, 8 unread messages from her mother, 2 from her best friend Nicole, one of which simply read, "What the hell did you do?" She opened her inbox and saw the subject line again, "Ask her about room 12." A dull ringing filled her ears. Her mouth went dry. She clicked into the email. The photos loaded slowly on the motel Wi-Fi, each one a dagger. She recognized the jacket, the timestamp, the angle of the photo. Someone had been watching. He had been watching. Her fingers trembled as she opened the attachments. She felt her lungs collapse. The messages were clean, undeniable, with no accusations, just quiet, surgical proof. Ryan hadn't exploded, he hadn't screamed, he hadn't shown up with broken glass and fists full of rage. No, he'd waited, and then he'd destroyed her world, precisely efficiently, like a man who had nothing left to lose and plenty left to prove. Back in the house they once shared, Ryan stood in the hallway, staring at the row of photos on the wall. Smiling vacations, birthday dinners, ski trips with Caitlin clinging to his arm, laughing. They were all fake now. Paper ghosts. He walked into the bedroom, now spotless and impersonal. Caitlin's things were already gone, her drawers emptied the night before, her toothbrush snapped and discarded, a detail he didn't remember doing, but also didn't regret. His phone buzzed again. He finally checked. Caitlin, please, Ryan, please call me. I didn't mean for this to happen. I can explain everything. Just please, talk to me. He read it 3 times. The desperation was textbook. The guilt wasn't real. It was fear of exposure, fear of judgment, fear of losing the image she'd built. Ryan typed 2 words. We're done. He didn't hit send. He deleted the message. Then he blocked her number. Let her wonder. Let her drown in that silence. Elsewhere, the dominoes continued falling. Caitlin's manager, furious about the embarrassment, called her into an emergency meeting. Her polished public image, always poised, always professional, was cracking under the whispers. Clients had already seen the photos. One had already requested to be reassigned. Nicole, the once loyal best friend, now ice cold, left a voicemail. You're disgusting. I defended you for years. You don't deserve him. Don't call me again. And her parents? They didn't even bother with a call. Her father replied to the email with 2 words. We're disappointed. Caitlin sat in the parking lot of her office, makeup smudged, hair wild, staring at herself in the mirror. She didn't look like the woman who controlled every room. She looked like a liar who finally got caught. And the worst part? And he didn't yell. He didn't cry. He walked away without looking back and left her reputation, her pride, and her identity in ruins. That night, Ryan didn't sleep, not because he was haunted, but because he finally had peace. The silence wasn't cruel. It was earned. And as he sat on his balcony, the city lights flickering below, a new message appeared on his phone. An unknown number. You don't know the whole story. She wasn't the only one lying. He stared at it for a long time. And for the first time since this all began, he smiled. The message sat there like a landmine in Ryan's inbox. You don't know the whole story. She wasn't the only one lying. No name, no number, just a phantom digit trail leading to a burner service in Nevada. It could have been spam, a prank, or Caitlin's desperate attempt to twist the blade in reverse. And yet, Ryan couldn't stop staring at it. It arrived precisely 12 hours after he'd hit send on her professional downfall. Too calculated to be random. He tried to shake it off. He'd won. The evidence was out. Her reputation was in shambles. Her friends had turned on her. Her father, once cold but respectable, hadn't even offered her a defense. And still, someone out there was suggesting he didn't have the full picture. He poured himself a drink. Whiskey, neat, untouched for months, and sat by the window. His reflection stared back at him, hard lines beneath the eyes, shoulders tensed despite the quiet. He should have felt relief, triumph, closure, but now all he felt was unfinished. By the next morning, Ryan's usual control began to fray at the edges. The message replayed in his head like a whisper on loop. He started reviewing everything again, the photos, the texts, even the surveillance data. Had he missed something? A detail overlooked? He opened the gallery. Each frame was time-stamped, clear, unambiguous. Caitlin, Derek, the motel, the jacket, the kiss. There was no ambiguity in what he'd seen. But the message didn't question what she did, it questioned who else had played a part. That's what gnawed at him now. Ryan drove to the coffee shop where Caitlin often met her friends. A stupid move maybe, but something compelled him, an instinct he'd learned never to ignore. He parked across the street and waited, watching the glass storefront from the shadows of his car. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe Derek, maybe Melissa, maybe whoever had sent that message. No one unusual appeared, just the baristas. A few freelancers tapping at laptops, and 2 middle-aged women chatting too loudly about real estate. Still, something tugged at him, like static in the air. That afternoon he searched her social media, not the public accounts she curated like a resume, but the alt ones. The hidden ones he'd only discovered after months of suspicion. They were still active. But something was off. On a private Instagram under the handle @KateUnfiltered, Caitlin had posted a news story. A single black screen with white text. Betrayal cuts both ways. It had been posted 10 minutes ago. Ryan's heart thudded. Was she taunting him? Trying to reclaim narrative? Or was it about someone else entirely? He tapped through the rest of her stories. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched, being played, returned. That evening, a second message came through. Same hidden number. Same minimal style. You might want to ask Derek what he was really after. This time, Ryan didn't hesitate. He ran a background search on Derek Jones. On the surface, 34, freelance consultant, no criminal record, a degree in marketing, worked with a few design firms. Charming, clean, too clean. Ryan dug deeper, cross-referenced photos, found a LinkedIn account with a different last name, Derek Hale, a profile wiped of activity. Another alias? Then he found an old online forum post, archived from a corporate whistleblower blog. The post detailed a man named Derek Hale, who had a habit of infiltrating mid-sized marketing firms through romantic entanglements with key employees. Once inside, he'd siphon data, contacts, even intellectual property, then vanish. The blog post was from 5 years ago. There was a photo. It was him, Derek. The man in Caitlin's bed wasn't just a lover. He was a professional manipulator, and Caitlin, had she known, or had she been played too? Ryan sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Suddenly, everything shifted. What if Caitlin wasn't the architect of the betrayal, but just the vessel? What if Derek had seduced her for access to her company's branding assets, her login credentials? What if Caitlin hadn't fallen for someone behind his back? What if she'd been used? And the anonymous messages? Were they warning him or leading him? He didn't want to admit it, but the certainty he'd clung to was cracking. What if his revenge hadn't just destroyed a cheater, but a victim? No, he couldn't afford that doubt. But now he needed answers. He reopened the Tracker app. Caitlin had never deleted the link he'd secretly installed months ago during their trust rebuilding phase. It was still active. Her phone was at a small apartment complex in a neighboring town. He memorized the address. He was going to confront her, not out of rage, not out of revenge, but to ask one question. Who was really pulling the strings? Ryan stood in front of apartment 3B, a dull gray door with chipped paint and a crooked number. He hesitated, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar weight of doubt pressing on his chest. He'd come for clarity, not closure, for facts, not forgiveness. He knocked once, firm, deliberate, footsteps inside. Then the soft click of a deadbolt. The door opened. Caitlin appeared, eyes wide and swollen, mascara still smudged from a storm of tears she hadn't planned for. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stood there, silent, like she'd been expecting him, but didn't know what version of him would show up. Ryan broke the silence. Derek isn't who you think he is. She blinked. I don't think I know who anyone is anymore. He stepped inside without waiting for permission. The apartment was bare, a mattress on the floor, unpacked boxes, no framed photos, just transition. I did what I did, she said softly, and I don't expect your forgiveness. Ryan didn't respond. He placed his phone on the counter and slid it toward her. On the screen, Derek's face beside an article titled, "The Social Engineer Behind the Brand Scandals." Caitlin leaned in, lips parting as she read. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror to a kind of muted realization. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter. I thought I was in control, she whispered. I thought I was choosing him. Ryan nodded slowly. You weren't. You were chosen. She turned toward him, eyes pleading. Then why did you expose me like that? If you suspected, if you had any idea, because I didn't know then, Ryan interrupted, his voice low. And by the time I did, I'd already pulled the trigger. A beat of silence stretched between them. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't closure. It was something colder. Mutual recognition of shared destruction. I wasn't innocent, Caitlin said finally. But I didn't know I was being played. I didn't know I was the means to an end. Ryan looked at her not as a lover, not even as a betrayer, but as someone who had, in the end, been used just like him. You weren't the only one, he said. He was after your company's campaigns. Access, IP, you were the doorway. Her hands trembled as she backed into a chair. And now? I have nothing left. That's not true, Ryan replied quietly. You still have the wreckage. She looked up sharply, a flicker of anger passing through her eyes, but then fading into something heavier. And you? He exhaled. I have silence. And questions. A long pause, the kind that settles deep in the chest. Then Caitlin said, the messages, those anonymous texts. That wasn't me. Ryan's brow furrowed. Then who? I thought it was you messing with me. They stared at each other, the full gravity of that statement sinking in. Outside, the sun had set, casting the apartment in dusky orange light. Ryan turned to leave, his hand resting on the doorknob. I don't know if what I did was justice or just cruelty, he said. But I know this. Neither of us got away clean. Caitlin didn't reply. She just nodded, once, barely visible. As Ryan stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked it. Another message, unknown number. You were never the only player. The game's not over. He stared at it. Then, without flinching, he deleted it and walked into the night.